All right, so for our next session, I want to give you an ultimate proof of creation. And that's not an exaggeration. What I want to give you is a demonstration that creation, biblical creation in particular, is true. And this isn't just an argument for creation, it's an argument for the biblical worldview, the Bible being true. And it's a very different kind of proof than what many people are used to. It's very powerful. Because I have to tell you, a lot of people think that the way you win an origins debate is you accumulate the most evidence. You try to memorize as many science facts as you can, and there's some value in that. Don't get me wrong. I like science very much, and I think there's some value in that. But we're going to find that no matter how much science you know, there's always somebody smarter. There's always going to be somebody who knows more than you do. And so that would only leave you able to be winsome with people who don't know as much on that topic. Is there an argument, though, that kind of blows every other away? Because we can't know everything about science. Even those of us who go out and I have a PhD in astrophysics, but I don't know everything about astrophysics. I specialized in one field, and I know that very well, but it's a very small fraction of what is known. And we can only, you can only know so much evidence. So is there a method I could use, an argument that is so powerful if I just kind of studied this one, it would blow everything else away? And the answer is yes, there is. And that's what I want to give you this evening. And as you use this ultimate proof of creation, you may find that people do not always accept it. And you might be tempted to think, well, maybe the proof's not as good as I thought it was. But the thing you need to remember is just because somebody won't cry uncle doesn't mean I don't have them in a headlock, right? People sometimes are not persuaded by a very good argument. That doesn't mean the argument's bad, right? In fact, people are often persuaded by bad arguments. That's what logical fallacies are. Logical fallacies are bad arguments that people tend to find convincing. And you can take classes on logic to learn about those and how to avoid them. But no, I'm not giving you an ultimate persuasion because I can't ultimately make anybody be a Christian, and neither can you. And I can't make anybody believe in creation, and neither can you. It's up to God. It's up to the Holy Spirit. But I can give them an argument they can't refute. And that's what I want to give you this evening. So don't be discouraged if you use this argument on somebody and you do it graciously, which we should always be. We should always be gracious in the way we deal with people. Don't be upset if they don't immediately convert to Christianity. And by the way, I've had people years later that have said, yep, that makes sense now. I got it. And they do convert later. So God can use our arguments as part of the means by which he wins people to himself. It's ultimately up to him, but we get the honor of being the people that God uses to defend the faith, and that is a tremendous honor indeed. So keep in mind, if people aren't convinced by it, that doesn't mean the argument's bad. It just means people are not always logical. People are not always persuaded by a good argument. Now, the other objection I want to head off at the pass is, well, if there's an ultimate proof of creation, then do I need faith? The answer is yes. Faith is not something that, well, how did Mark Twain put it? Faith is believing what you know ain't so. And that's not the biblical definition of faith, right? The biblical definition of faith is when you have confidence in something you have not perceived with your senses. Hebrews 11:1 makes that very clear. I have confidence in the existence of God in the Christian worldview, even though I can't see God in the same way I can see you, because he's not a physical being. We understand that. But I have confidence in it because it's provable. Faith is not contrary to proof. And we'll see how that works out as we go along here. Before I get to this ultimate proof, I want to show you some lines of evidence that are good and they confirm creation, but they fall short of being an ultimate proof. And I want to do that so by way of contrast, you can see how the ultimate proof is different, okay? And so, for example, information theory, when its progress along the chain of transmission events is traced backwards, every piece of information leads to a mental source, the mind of the sender. That's in Dr. Werner Gitt's book. Dr. Werner Gitt's an expert on information theory, how information is transmitted, and he finds that whenever you have information, say in a book, you pick up a book, it's got some information in it, right? Maybe it's a cookbook. It's got some information in it. Where did that come from? He says, well, you trace it backwards. It came probably from a machine that makes lots of those books at the same time, right? And that came probably that got its information from a computer, which got its information from another computer, which got its information ultimately from a mind. Somebody wrote it. Information always originates in a mind. A Xerox machine can copy information, it can't create it. Only a mind can create information. Inanimate objects can copy it and lose it, they can't create it. And that's very interesting because in DNA is that long molecule in the cells of your body. It's got all the instructions to make you, which is really amazing. So, and the reason you're a person and not a cabbage is you have instructions to make a person, and a cabbage has instructions to make a cabbage, and you got the long end of the stick on that one. So there you go. So where did this information come from in your DNA? You got it from your parents. It was copied from them. You get half of the information from each parent, so you have a full set. And they got theirs from their parents, and they got it from their parents, all the way back to Adam and Eve, who got their information from God. All the information to make all the physical traits in all of us, in terms of the actual information content, was implanted in Adam and Eve, in their DNA. And we know how that works now, genetically, at least the basics of it. Pretty amazing. See, that's consistent with information theory, which says that information ultimately comes from a mind. The information in your DNA came from the mind of God. Pretty neat. It's not consistent with evolution. Because in the evolutionary worldview, nobody created the information in your DNA. It simply happened, it gradually increased by chance. We have never observed that in nature. That appears to be a violation of the laws of nature. What about mutations? There are some circumstances where mutations can actually lead to a trait that helps an organism survive. That can happen, but never by increasing information. All point mutations that have been studied on a molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information, not to increase it, according to Dr. Lisle, who's a PhD in biophysics, Johns Hopkins University. He says not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome. See, in order to turn something like a bacterium into people over millions of years, as evolutionists believe, you'd have to add brand new mutations would have to add new information. They don't do that. They lose information, and sometimes that results in a new trait, but it's never an improvement in the sense of increasing the complexity, the specified complexity of your genome. And so genetics and information theory are consistent with creation, or what we'd expect. Information comes from a mind. All the information in us came originally from the mind of God in terms of our genetic information. It's not compatible with the evolutionary worldview, where information gradually accumulates over millions of years. We could talk about the age of things. Now, again, I mentioned, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow for those of you that are able to come, about how the Bible very clearly teaches that God made in 6 days. Human beings are made on day 6, and that was a few thousand years ago, because you can add up the ages of the genealogies and so on. The Bible indicates about 4,000 years between Adam and Christ's earthly ministry, which was about 2,000 years ago. So something like 6,000 years for the age of the earth and the universe, for that matter. People scoff at that, but the evidence is really consistent with that. For example, carbon dating. A lot of people have the misimpression that carbon dating is what secular scientists use to get the millions of years. It isn't. There are other methods they use that they think supports that, not carbon dating. Carbon dating is based on C14. Most carbon is C12. Remember, it's got 6 protons and 6 neutrons in the nucleus. There's a variety, C14, that has 2 extra neutrons, and that makes it unstable, meaning it will spontaneously change into nitrogen. C14 would really rather be nitrogen, and it will change. You don't have to do anything to it. It'll sit there for a while, and then pop, it'll change into nitrogen and give off energy when it does it. And we talk about it. How long would it take for a chunk of C14 to turn into nitrogen? A few thousand years. The half-life is 5,700 years. And so the bottom line is, if the entire Earth were nothing but C14, after 1 million years, you'd not have one atom of it left. It would have all disintegrated into nitrogen. That's what it does. And yet we find it in diamonds that secularists believe to be 1 to 2 billion years old, but they have C14 in them. C14 does not last that long. And so that's a real conundrum, but it's consistent with biblical creation. In biblical creation, only half of the C14 on the planet has decayed away. And of course, there's new that's produced in the atmosphere, but it's not produced down where these diamonds are. So that's a problem for millions of years. It's not a problem for the biblical timescale. Comets, for example, comets are made of ice and dirt, and they orbit the sun in elliptical paths. So the ice far away from the sun, that's no problem. But then the ice comes close to the sun. You think ice close to the sun, that can't be good. And you'd be right. It vaporizes that icy material. That's what forms the comet's tail. That's material that's being depleted away from the nucleus of the comet and being blasted into space by solar heat and radiation and solar wind. So every time you see a comet, it's losing material. All comets are in the process of disintegrating, all of them. And we know the rate at which that material is being depleted. We can see it. We can measure that. We know how much material's there. The nucleus of a comet is an ice dirt ball that's a few miles across, typically. And so we can do the calculation. How long does a comet last? A typical comet can last about 100,000 years, maximum. And after that, gone. In fact, I've seen comets that do not exist anymore because they've been completely disintegrated. Sometimes a comet, I used to use the SOHO spacecraft in my doctoral research, and it's designed to look at the sun, and one of the instruments it has on it blocks the sun and looks at everything around the sun. And comets get really bright when they get close to the sun, but it's hard for us to see them because it's close to the sun. But SOHO's designed for that. I've seen comets that have gone behind the sun and been completely obliterated in one pass, and they just don't exist anymore. So they do not last millions of years. But we still got comets. See, the secularists believe the solar system's 4.5 billion years old. But if that were the case, all the comets should be gone by now, right? That's what you'd think. And it may seem, and I could give lots more evidence along these lines, and there are other presentations I do on these topics. And it might seem like, well, I've pretty well buried evolution, right? Because it can't even get off the ground in 6,000 years. That's not going to work. And all, information in our DNA and all these different lines of evidence, carbon dating and so on, that confirm a young Earth and indeed a young solar system. But I really haven't I haven't proved biblical creation from these examples. And the reason is because for every line of evidence that I produce, scientific line of evidence that confirms creation, a secularist can always come up with what we might call a rescuing device. He can come up with a conjecture that protects his worldview, his way of thinking, from what appears to be evidence to the contrary. For example, with comets, my secular colleagues can do the same math I can do. They know comets can't last billions of years. And they see that we still have comets. So they conclude, well, there must be a source that produces new comets over billions of years, which they call the Oort cloud. And so the idea is that there is this, way beyond Neptune, beyond the farthest planets out there, there's this big sphere of trillions of potential comets kind of orbiting in a circular path. And every now and then, one of them gets dislodged and thrown into the inner solar system to become a brand new comet. So as old comets disintegrate, new ones replace them. That must be what's going on, you see. And you'll read about the Oort cloud in textbooks. You won't see it in your telescope, but you'll see it in the textbooks. If I were to ask a secular astronomer, do you have any observational evidence of an Oort cloud? If he's honest, he'll say, no. And if he's clever, he'll say, but you can't prove it's not there. And it's true. I can't disprove the existence of an undetectable Oort cloud. It's undetectable. It's at a distance way beyond any technology we have today. See, that's the nature of a rescuing device. Any line of evidence I produce that seems to confirm creation, a clever person will come up with a rescuing device, a conjecture that explains away that evidence in terms of his worldview. Does that make sense? And you can do that for anything. For example, the information in our DNA. Now, information, as far as we know, always comes from a mind. And so that discounts evolution as the way in which our genome was produced, but it confirms creation, because God's mind is responsible for the information in our DNA. But a secularist could say, well, there could be some undiscovered natural process that produces information. We just haven't discovered it yet. And it's true. How do you know that there's not something undiscovered? There's all kinds of things that are undiscovered. How do we know that's not one of them, right? Or I could say, what about the C14 in diamonds? That should have disintegrated away, billions of years ago if they're really billions of years old. You say, well, there could be some kind of contamination. There's some kind of recharging mechanism that recharges the C14. Anybody can do that. And by the way, you can do it too. If somebody asks you about an alleged contradiction in the Bible, well, here's a possibility. If you don't know the answer right away, you're not inclined to throw out Scripture. You're inclined to say, well, give me time, let me research it a little bit, and that's fine. Because we all have a worldview. We have a way of looking at the universe, and that affects the conclusions that we draw. And so my evolutionist colleague and myself, we both look at the same world. We look at the same solar system. I look at the same comets that he looks at. And we draw different interpretations about what it means because we have a different starting point. We have a different way of thinking. I look at comets and I go, oh yeah, solar system's a few thousand years old, so we still have some. My secular colleague looks at the very same comet and says, well, there must be an Oort cloud producing new ones because there's no way that could last billions of years. It's recent. We all have that. a lot of people think that the way you win this debate is you get more facts on your side. But the fact is, creationists and evolutionists have the same facts, don't we? We do science the same way. In terms of operational science, the kind of science we do in the present, right, where we can repeat and experiment and so on. I do stoichiometry the same way as my secular colleagues. I do math the same way they do. We have the same science, but we draw very different conclusions about, especially the past, reconstructing the past, because we have a different worldview, which you can think of like mental glasses. Only some of us wear glasses physically, but we all have mental glasses. We have a way of looking at the world, a way of thinking about things, and that will affect the conclusions that we draw. I like to think of the Bible like prescription lenses that are designed just for you. They're corrective lenses because the Bible gives us the correct view of the world. You put those glasses on, everything snaps into focus, and you see things the way they really are. I like to think of evolution like red glasses. You put on red glasses and you'll say, wow, everything's red. Well, it's not, but that's what you see. That colors your view, and it causes you to draw a conclusion that in that case is false. Now, I recognize the evolutionists will say, no, we're wearing the right glasses, you're wearing the wrong one. I'm just pointing out that we all have these mental glasses. We all do. Because we all have what we call presuppositions. These are our most basic beliefs about reality. They're the rules of interpretation we assume at the outset before any investigation of the evidence. People have this impression that science is very neutral and objective, and you're supposed to come to the evidence with no assumptions, and that's a noble goal, but it's impossible because we're not a rock. We have beliefs, okay? We think about things, and there's certain beliefs that we hold to really strongly. A presupposition is not just any belief. It's something you hold to really strongly, like your own existence. If I were to try to convince you don't actually exist, you would be very resistant to that. Any argument I make, you'd be resistant to it, wouldn't you? Because that's something you hold to strongly. The basic reliability of your senses. Presumably, you believe that what you see and hear, taste, touch, smell, is approximately reality, right? Right? I mean, you probably assume that I'm actually here right now because you see me and because you hear me, okay? But how do you know that that's really the case? How do you know you're not a brain in a jar? And this is all, it's kind of like the Matrix. It's just a computer simulation, and I'm not really here. How do you know that? We're resistant to even beginning to think that way. We hold to a reliability of our senses very strongly. The basic reliability of your memory is another example of a presupposition. You presume that what you remember happening actually happened, that your memory is basically reliable. And you say, oh, no, not me. I know my memory's reliable because I took a memory test 2 weeks ago, Dr. Lisle, and I got an A on it. And then I'm going to ask, how do you know you took a memory test 2 weeks ago? Well, I remember taking, oh yeah. See, you'd have to assume that your memory's reliable in order to argue that you correctly remember that your memory is reliable. That's the nature of a presupposition. You can't escape that. That's the way they are. Laws of logic are presuppositions. If I said my car's in the parking lot, and it's not the case that my car's in the parking lot, not one of you would believe me. You'd say, well, you're mistaken or you're lying, because that can't be. That's a presupposition, that there are these laws of logic. Can I prove that there are laws of logic? I think I can, but not without using them, because that's what we use to prove anything, right? That's the nature of a presupposition. You see, there are foundational beliefs. There are tangential beliefs that we can be convinced otherwise, and then there are presuppositions that we hold on to very tightly. And these presuppositions affect how we interpret the evidence. And you can't escape that. It's just most people haven't thought about their own presuppositions. You do assume that your senses are basically reliable. I mean, you come along, there's a rock on the side of the road, and you say, I'm going to do some experiments on that rock, and I'm going to be rigorously scientific and not make any assumptions. You've already assumed that the rock is there because you see it. You've already assumed that your sight is basically reliable, haven't you? That's the nature of a presupposition. I mean, you can imagine somebody who didn't have that presupposition goes by, sees the rock, and that'd be cool if that actually existed, and then moves on. No, people don't think that way. Of course we presuppose that our senses are reliable. Now, some people say, not me. I don't have these presuppositions, these beliefs about how to interpret the evidence. I believe evidence ought to be interpreted neutrally. That's a belief about how to interpret the evidence, right? The belief that you should come to the evidence with no beliefs is itself a belief. It's just a really bad one because it's immediately self-refuting. So all of your presuppositions together, these basic beliefs that tell you how to interpret the evidence, they form your worldview. So that's your worldview, the collection of all of your presuppositions. And creationists and evolutionists have different presuppositions and therefore different worldviews. We have a different way of looking at the universe. And that causes us to interpret the evidence differently. And you'll find that presuppositions are hierarchical. Some are more basic than others. Sometimes you'll be willing to trade in a secondary presupposition to protect a more important one. And so that you'll find that there is an ultimate standard that we all interpret the evidence by. And for the Christian, that should be the Bible. For creationists, the Bible should be our ultimate foundation. We should interpret all evidence according to the lens of Scripture. If in fact it's the Word of God, as it claims to be, and it has demonstrated that it is, it would be foolish to start with anything else. Why not start with absolute certainty and build our thinking on that? We might make some mistakes in how we build our thinking, but at least our foundation is solid. With the evolutionists, there's different varieties of evolutionists, but usually naturalism or strict empiricism is their ultimate standard. Naturalism is the belief that nature's all that there is, that everything that happens within the laws of physics and chemistry and so on. Or strict empiricism, which is the belief that all truth claims should be answered by observation. So these are foundational ultimate standards that creationists and evolutionists have, and they're different, and that's why we interpret evidence differently. And by the way, I do have other presuppositions that are not as foundational as the Bible. For example, the reliability of my senses. I do believe my senses are basically reliable, but they're not infallible, because my senses can be fooled, and so can yours. Have you ever seen an optical illusion? You see, I actually have a little device that, using mirrors, it creates an image of anything you put inside it, but it looks like it's up here. And you can stick your finger right through that image, and it's so weird. Because I've got one sense, my eyes telling me there it is, and I've got another sense, my finger telling me, oh, it's not there. Have you ever put a beam of wood in water at an angle, and it looks like it bends when it goes into the water because of the way the light refracts? And so I've got my eyes telling me, oh, look, the wood bends, but then you feel it, oh, it doesn't bend. See, I've got a greater presupposition that tells me how to interpret that, because I know that there are certain circumstances in which optics, my sensors, my eyes can be fooled, right? Because of the way light refracts. We understand that. So, evidence by itself is never decisive when the debate is a worldview issue. So, if I'm conversing with someone who has a different worldview from my worldview, and I want to try to convince them their worldview is wrong, mere evidence by itself is not going to do it, because your worldview tells you what to make of the evidence. It tells you what it means. It's the greater thing. You can't use the lesser thing to change the greater thing, as a sort of clumsy way of putting it. A silly example I like to use to illustrate this is there was a man who was convinced that he was dead. He thought that he himself was dead, which I've come to learn is there's actually a real condition where people think they're dead. It's very strange. But anyway, he goes to his doctor. His doctor's trying to convince him, you're perfectly healthy. See, the guy's upset. He didn't like being dead, and he wonders what he can do about it. And the doctor's saying, of course you're not dead. You can walk and talk. And the guy thinks about it for a second. Well, the body can have muscle spasms even after clinical death. That could explain my ability to walk and talk. And the doctor says, but look, I've done a medical workup on you. You're perfectly healthy. And the man looks at it and says, yeah, but maybe that's not even my workup. Maybe the names got swapped. That might not even be my chart. And the doctor, okay, I'm going to prove to you that you're not dead. Do dead men bleed? And the guy thinks about it for a second. Well, the circulatory, his heart would be stopped. So no, dead men don't bleed. And the doctor very quickly takes a little pin, pricks the guy in the hand. Sure enough, a little blood comes to the surface. See, you're bleeding. To which the man responds, well, how about that? I guess dead men do bleed, right? That's a silly example, but makes the point. Did the doctor have good evidence? Oh, yeah. Guy could walk and talk, medical charts, the guy could bleed. There's nothing wrong with those lines of evidence. Did they convince the man? No. Because he had a presupposition that he was dead that told him how to interpret each of those lines of evidence, right? He was able to come up with a rescuing device to explain each line of evidence according to his own worldview. Now, are debates over religion like this? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And that's why people get very frustrated, because they'll say to someone, the intellectual equivalent of, see, you're bleeding, and the person will say, well, I guess dead men bleed then. Okay? That's why a lot of people talk past each other when they're debating things like creation versus evolution, or Christianity versus secularism or some other religion. See, it's perfectly fine to show people evidence, and I think there's some value in that, to show people that, hey, Bible's true. Fossils, I think fossils are great evidence that there was a worldwide flood. That's exactly what we'd expect to find. We find all kinds of dead organisms buried, a lot of times mixed together with aquatic, land and aquatic creatures mixed together, in sedimentary rock layers, which are water deposited. I think fossils are great evidence that the Bible's true, there really was a worldwide flood. But then again, I'm looking at it correctly through the lens of Scripture. My secular colleague is going to look at that very same evidence through his secular lens, and he's going to say, no, here's how I think fossils were formed. I think they were deposited gradually over hundreds of millions of years. I don't think there was a worldwide flood, but there were maybe lots of little ones separated by long periods of time. And we say, well, yeah, I guess you could look at it that way. So we think we need more evidence, right? So we present something else. Look, canyons can form quickly. They don't take millions of years necessarily. We know that. Mount St. Helens, when it erupted back in 1980, it produced a canyon 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon in a matter of hours. We know that can happen quickly. But my colleague could say, yes, but just because that one did doesn't mean the Grand Canyon did. We think it took millions of years. Oh, but we know rock layers, sediment can be deposited rapidly. Again, Mount St. Helens demonstrated that, laid down all kinds of new sediment, some of which is lithified. He said, again, just because that case proves it doesn't mean all cases are like that. We think these rock layers were laid down over millions of years. Oh, but look, animals, they reproduce according to their kinds. Kangaroos always beget kangaroos, consistent with creation. He says, well, sure, but given enough time, eventually it'd become another kind, you see. We just haven't been around long enough to observe evolution in action. Oh, but look, DNA, it's got information in it. Information always comes from a mind. It never comes about by chance. He says, well, there could be some undiscovered process that produces information naturally. We just haven't discovered it yet. Give us time, right? But look, things out in outer space, things like Saturn's rings or comets that disintegrate far too quickly for them to be billions of years old. And he says, no problem, there's an Oort cloud that makes new ones. There must be. After all, we still got comets, right? And when I present this, people say, are you saying we shouldn't present evidence? That's not what I'm saying. I think there's some value in this because our society is so secular and people have been so secularized that many people don't realize there is a Christian way to look at things. And so there is value in showing people scientific evidence and how the Bible makes sense of that, how it's consistent. There is value in that. Don't get me wrong. But if you think that's going to persuade someone who is tenaciously holding to a secular worldview and who is clever, it won't. If you're up against someone who is committed to a secular worldview, that's just the way he thinks about things, and he's sufficiently clever, no matter what evidence you present, he'll be able to explain it away. He'll be able to come up with a rescuing device. Human beings are very good at coming up with rescuing devices. We really are. So it's good to show people evidence and how the Bible makes sense of it. That by itself will not resolve a debate over worldviews because your worldview tells you what the evidence means. And I think the reason we get a little hung up on this is because we tend to spend most of our time with people that have a worldview that's very similar to ours, right? And if two people have basically the same worldview, they agree on what the evidence means. And you can persuade them by just showing them evidence. If you and I have a disagreement about whether or not there are crackers in the cupboard, we can settle that by opening up the cupboard, see there are crackers there, I was right. And we should come to agreement because we agree that our senses are reliable and we agree on what we see and so on. But if I'm arguing with somebody who has a very different worldview, say a Hindu, who believes that the world is all illusion, it's all Maya, which is what they believe, because they believe all is one, and the world, we see distinctions, therefore it can't be true. They don't believe in the reliability of their senses. They still look both ways before they cross the street, but they claim they don't believe in the reliability of their senses. I show him the crackers, is he going to come to agreement? No. He's going to say, well, that's just illusion too, you see. And so, if you have the same worldview, you can use evidence to persuade people of things, but you have a different worldview, evidence, that's not going to do it because the worldview tells you what the evidence means. You're going to come up with rescuing devices. So how do I demonstrate that biblical presuppositions are the right presuppositions with which to interpret the evidence? That's what I want to know. And before I give you the right answer, I have to give you the wrong answer because a lot of people assume that the way you win this is you meet on neutral ground. So I'm standing on my biblical presuppositions, and my secular friend is standing over on his secular presuppositions, and I know those are wrong, and I want to persuade him that he's wrong. And so usually it's the secularist who will propose meeting on neutral ground. He says, I don't believe your Bible, and I know you don't believe in all the things I believe, but maybe there's some neutral ground in the middle that we can meet on, and we'll give up the presuppositions we don't agree on. He says, I certainly don't agree with the Bible, so you have to leave that out of the conversation. A lot of people agree to those terms. That's a mistake. Because you see, the thing about neutral ground is there is no such thing as neutral ground. And the Bible's very clear about that. When it comes to a faith commitment, there's no neutral. Jesus said, he who is not with me, he doesn't say is neutral. He who is not with me is against me. He who does not gather with me scatters. Christ is very clear about that. You're with him or you're against him. There is no neutral ground there. There's no neutral ground there. We owe God our complete allegiance, not our indifference or neutrality. We're the creation. He's the creator. We owe him everything. And so to attempt to be neutral toward God is sin. It's rebellion against him. Romans 8:7, because the mind set on the flesh it's not neutral toward God. It's hostile toward God. For it does not subject itself to the law of God. It's not even able to do so. A lot of times people who are critics of Christianity will say, I'm neutral. It's not that I'm against God. It's just I'm not for him either. The Bible says you're in rebellion against him. By making that statement, you've shown your rebellion against God. You've shown that you're not grateful to him for your creation or for offering you salvation for that matter. James 4:4, do you not know that friendship with the world, it's not neutrality toward God, it's hostility toward God. So the Bible's very clear that there is no neutral, right? And so when a person claims to be neutral, they're saying the Bible is wrong, right? Which means they're not being neutral. The claim of neutrality is a non-biblical and therefore non-neutral claim. Isn't that interesting? And by the way, make sure you understand that because you will have to explain that to somebody at some point, I guarantee you. If you take them down this line of reasoning. Secularists like to think they're very neutral. They're going to want you to be neutral. You need to point out that in attempting to be neutral, they've already rebelled against God. They've decided that their mind is the ultimate standard by which truth will be determined and not the mind of God. And that is sin. The claim of neutrality is a non-neutral and anti-biblical claim. Bible says there's no neutral. If you say, yes, there is, you've said the Bible's wrong. That's not neutral. That's anti-biblical. So, need to keep this in mind. So, don't fall for this. When the secularist says, let's meet on neutral ground, we got to give up the presuppositions we don't agree on, and I don't agree with the Bible. A lot of Christians do that. They'll say, oh, fine, I'll leave the Bible out of it. We'll just talk science. Big mistake. Big mistake. Because neutral ground is really a secular concept. The Bible does not allow for it. And so if you agree to those terms, you've pretty well lost the debate at the outset. Because isn't the debate really about whether or not God's word is true? That's really what the creation-evolution debate's about, at the bottom line. If God's word is true, creation is true. Evolution's false. It's that simple. If evolution's true, the Bible's false. It's that simple. And you can't defend biblical authority by immediately throwing it away. You can't say, I'm going to show you that the Bible's the ultimate source for truth. To start, let's just ignore it as if it doesn't exist and is not the ultimate source of truth. That's not going to work. You can't defend biblical authority by abandoning biblical authority. Secularists like to think they're neutral. They're going to want you to be neutral. Two things to remember when people ask you to be neutral. One, they're not. Two, you shouldn't be. No one's neutral. You shouldn't try to be neutral. God hasn't called you to be neutral. He's called you to be a Christian. No one can approach the scientific evidence without any presuppositions. To think that you can is a presupposition, and it's a bad one. The man of God, according to Titus 1:9, is to hold fast the faithful word, both to exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict. We stand on God's word even when refuting people who reject it. They say, but Dr. Lisle, I don't believe in God's word. That's your problem. You need to get saved. You need to repent of that. That's sin. Now, I'm not going to be arbitrary and just say, believe the Bible because you need to believe the Bible. I am going to make an argument. But the fact that you reject the Scripture doesn't mean I'm going to stop using it. If you didn't believe in air, I'm not going to hold my breath, right? Okay. So, How do we get anywhere? We can't just throw evidence back and forth. That's not going to work because that's not really what the debate is about. It's not about evidence. It's about worldviews. It's about presuppositions, how to interpret the evidence. That's what it's about. And we can't meet on neutral ground because there's no such thing. So how do we get anywhere in this debate? Now, here's the answer. Biblical presuppositions and only biblical presuppositions make knowledge possible. And both creationists and evolutionists have knowledge. And that could only be the case if creation's true. I'll show you how this works, but let me show you scripturally that this is something that the Bible teaches. Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The Bible's clear that knowledge begins in God because God's mind is the source of all truth. God's mind isn't like ours. In some ways it is. We can think God's thoughts after him, but our minds discover truth. God's mind determines truth. That's why Jesus can say, thy word is truth, and that's definitional. And so you want to know anything, you better submit to God's standards. You better show fear, a respectful submission to God, to his word. And if you reject it, the Bible says you're a fool. You're reduced to foolishness. You can't have knowledge because all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are deposited in Christ, according to Colossians 2:3. Everything that can be known is in Christ. So if you know anything, it's because God has given that knowledge to you in one way or another. And he gives it to us in his word, he gives it to us through our senses and so on. But it ultimately comes from God. And so if the Bible were not true, if God were not who the Bible claims he is, we couldn't know anything. And some people say, but that doesn't sound right because I have some unbelieving friends and they do know things. That's right. But then again, they do know God in their heart of hearts. They just suppress that truth in unrighteousness. That's what the Bible says in Romans 1:18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. God's revealed himself to everyone, and he's angry at them for their sin. And the problem, according to the last part of that verse, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. It doesn't say these people who just don't know any better. They just haven't seen enough evidence for God yet. The Bible says God's revealed himself to them, and they suppress that truth in unrighteousness. And so somebody comes to me and says, I'm an atheist. I say, no, you're not. You do believe in God, and you hate him. That's your problem. I'm just going to be honest with you. They're going to be offended by that. I'm going to say, I'm just telling you the truth. That's the way it is. Here's what God says about you. Verse 19, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, without an apologetic is the way it's worded in Greek. It's kind of interesting. They don't have a defense. So one way to do apologetics, I think the right way, is to recognize unbelievers don't have one. They cannot defend their worldview, their way of thinking. They can't. And, a lot of people like to quote Romans 1:20, but remember the context. Romans 1:18 and 19. God's revealed himself to everybody. God has hardwired every human being to know that he exists and to recognize when we see creation that it's his handiwork. It takes a great deal of brainwashing to convince people that, no, this amazing universe just sort of happened, just kind of an explosion that happened billions of years ago. That is not a natural way of thinking about things. It doesn't make sense. It's not rational. So everyone, according to Scripture, everyone has knowledge of the biblical God. And by the way, it doesn't say a concept of deity. They know God. They know Yahweh. They know the living God. But they deny him. And they suppress that truth in unrighteousness. If you really take this verse to heart, and you should, it'll change the way you do apologetics. Because I don't need to present a lot of new evidence to my unbelieving friend. There is some value in that, but I don't need to do that ultimately because that person already knows the biblical God and hates him. That's the issue. And so what I do as an apologist, let's say I'm dealing with somebody who professes atheism, I don't try to present him new evidence for God. I show that he already believes in God. And I'll show you how to do that. Because you see, he has knowledge. And my argument is that only the Bible makes sense of things that are necessary for knowledge. Now, that's a different kind of an argument. And if you haven't heard that before, that may sound strange, but it's very powerful. And I'll show you how it works. Only the Bible can make sense of those things that are necessary for knowledge. In order for us to know anything about anything, we would have to be a certain way. The universe would have to be a certain way, right? There would have to be a certain degree of orderliness in the universe, right? If everything was chaos, we couldn't really know anything, could we? There'd be no orderliness. You couldn't even know that 2 plus 2 is 4 because the next second it might be something different if the universe was just chaotic. There has to be a degree of orderliness in nature. For me to know anything about the external world, my senses would have to be basically reliable. I'd have to be more than just a brain in a jar. My eyes would have to work properly and form images of the things that, that I see out in the world and so on. And what I'm going to show you is that all of these things that we take for granted only make sense if the Bible's true. And so my argument for biblical creation and for the Bible in general is that if it weren't true, you couldn't prove anything is true. The fact that we have knowledge of anything is only possible in a Christian universe. And that's true for believers and it's true for unbelievers. They don't like that. They deny that, but it's still true for them. So, and I want to show you 3 specific areas, 3 specific things that we rely upon to have knowledge that only make sense if the Bible's true. One of these would be laws of logic. Laws of logic are what we use to reason. Now, you may never have had a class in logic. You might not be able to recite any laws of logic, but you already know some of them because you couldn't function without them. God has hardwired them into you. Again, if I said my car's in the parking lot and it's not the case that my car's in the parking lot, you would not be fooled by that. You immediately know that's wrong. You can't have A and not A at the same time and in the same sense. That's the law of non-contradiction. You all know it. You couldn't get up in the morning without that law because you think, I think I'm going to get up and get a shower. Well, maybe I'm already in the shower. That doesn't, no. If I'm here, I'm not there, and so on. We understand that, right? That's a law of reasoning. It's a law of right reasoning. But how would you have laws of right reasoning in a chance universe that's not governed by a mind? And who decides what those laws should be? Are they like speed limits where we kind of make up the law depending on where we're at, in which case different nations could have different laws of logic, just as different nations, even different states and counties have different speed limits? Well, that wouldn't work, right? I mean, the law of non-contradiction, it's not just true here, but hey, in Australia, contradictions can be true. No, that doesn't work, right? Laws of logic are universal. How do we know that? Everyone believes that. You all believe that if you went to the moon, that laws of logic would still work there. All of you believe that, right? That you can't have A and not A at the same time in the same sense. When the astronauts went to the moon back in the 60s, they had lots of concerns because that was an incredibly complex mission. A lot of stuff could have gone wrong. They were worried about a lot of things, mechanical equipment failing and so on. But one of the things they were not worried about, boy, we hope laws of logic work on the moon. Otherwise, we might die and not die, right? It's not going to work, is it? No, they understand that. We all know that laws of logic are the way God thinks about things. They're a reflection of his thinking, and therefore the way we must think if we're to think truthfully. They extend from his nature. That's why they work on the moon and the Andromeda Galaxy and on Mars and so on, because God is omnipresent and he's sovereign over the whole universe. And so his laws will govern correct reasoning everywhere. Now, you all assume that. Astronomers assume that laws of logic work in the Andromeda Galaxy, or they wouldn't bother studying it, right? But how could you possibly know that on your own authority? Any of you been to the Andromeda Galaxy? Have any of you even left the solar system? And yet we assume laws of logic work in the entire universe. That's incredibly audacious unless you're a Christian. And you can say, oh, but my God's sovereign over the universe, so his thinking will be truth everywhere. It would have to be that case. Laws of logic don't change with time, right? It's not like, sure, you can't have A and not A at the same time today, but on Thursdays you can. Contradictions can be true on Thursdays. I can have a car that's there and not there. It's pretty cool. No, that wouldn't work, right? But how do we know that laws of logic persist over time, that they'll be true in the future as they were in the past? Well, because God is beyond time and he does not change, right? God says, I do not change, therefore you sons of Jacob are not consumed. God's beyond time, and therefore his thinking will not change. Laws of logic will be as they always have been, because God is and will be always as he has been. See, I can make sense of the existence of laws of logic and their properties from a Christian perspective. The secularist, he believes in laws of logic, but he can't make sense of them, because in a chance universe, why would there be laws at all? And who decides what they are? And how could you possibly know that they're the same everywhere, or that they'll work at all times, or that they'll work even 1 second from now? You can't know that. Uniformity of nature. We assume that just means there's orderliness in nature. I expect that tomorrow when I get out of bed, gravity will work the same way it did today. Presumably, all of you believe that. When you got up this morning, you just say, I'm not sure. Gravity might send me hurtling toward the ceiling. I better brace. No, you assumed that gravity would pull you down as it has in the past. Every step you take, you're assuming that momentum will work as it has before, that gravity will work as it has before. But how do you know? Right? I mean, I've never been on this particular date before. I've never been in this church before. How did I know gravity would work here? I'm grateful it does, but how did I know that? In the Christian worldview, I can make sense of that because I have a promise from God. God's promised a certain degree of orderliness in nature. The seasons will continue, for example, as long as the earth remains, according to Genesis 8:22. God has promised us a certain degree of regularity in nature. And we can count on that. And by the way, all science rests on that principle. If this universe were truly chance, science would not be possible because science presupposes orderliness and patterns to be discovered, and that we can discover underlying patterns by looking at specific instances of them. That's called induction. None of that makes sense in a secular worldview. The secular philosopher David Hume was utterly stumped on this question. How do you know the sun will rise tomorrow? He couldn't answer. He knew that somehow we knew that the sun will rise tomorrow, but he couldn't explain how on his secular worldview. I can answer that as a Christian. I can say Genesis 8:22, God promised me the sun will rise tomorrow. And he's in a position to know because he's beyond time. I can make sense of uniformity in nature. It's based on Christian thinking. It's based on the information revealed in God's word. Now those two, laws of logic, uniformity of nature, those are kind of abstract, and I realize a lot of people haven't given a lot of thought to those. I want to really hammer home option number 3 because I think this one is something that is a little more tangible to us because we do spend time thinking about right and wrong, morality. But my point is, morality, especially an absolute objective morality where we have these rules that don't change, that are the same, like you shall not murder, that makes sense in a Christian worldview. But does it make sense in a chance universe? Why would there be morality in a chance universe where we're just fizzing chemicals? What one chemical accident does to another chemical accident is morally irrelevant. There's no right or wrong about it. I fizz one way, you fizz another way, who cares if we're just chemicals? On the other hand, if I'm made in God's image and if I have a certain degree of choice in what I do, and I can obey God or disobey him, and there's punishments and rewards depending on obedience or disobedience and so on, now I can explain absolute morality. There is a morality because God is the creator and he has the right to make the rules. Okay? And so for that reason, we have this moral code. It's the same for all of us because we're all made in God's image. God's a linguistic being. He's communicated to us, right? And so we can have these absolute objective truths like you shall not murder, and that makes sense in the Christian worldview. It makes no sense in a chance universe where might makes right. If I can get away with something, why not? In the Christian worldview, you can't ultimately get away with anything. God sees all, and he'll bring all to light on the day of judgment. Now, my point is not that secularists don't believe in laws of logic or uniformity of nature, absolute morality. Of course they do. You can't survive without those. My point is, on their professed worldview, they would have no rational foundation for believing in any of those things. And so when I point out, hey, laws of logic, that makes sense. It stems from the mind of God. And the atheist says, oh, but I believe in laws of logic. I say, I know, but you shouldn't, because in your worldview, you're just, who decides what laws should be? Who decides what right reasoning is? And how do you know they'll be the same tomorrow or next Thursday, or that they'll work the same on Mars or the moon? He believes those things, but you know why he believes them? Because he knows in his heart of hearts the biblical God. But he's suppressing that truth in unrighteousness. He believes in uniformity of nature. When I get these atheists mocking me on the internet and they're typing, they're expecting that when they press K, it will produce a K on the screen because there's an orderliness in nature. Now, in a chance universe, next time I press K on the screen, it might blow up the earth for all I know. It's a chance universe. Anything could happen, right? You have no right to expect any degree of orderliness in a chance universe. You say, well, it's been that way in the past. That doesn't guarantee it'll be that way in the future, right? Well, it's always been that way. Oh, well, in that case, I'm immortal. After all, I've never died before, right? Therefore, I never will. Does that work? It's not logical, is it? In a chance universe, you can't guarantee that something will continue 1 second from now, and yet secularists do believe that. They're relying on these biblical principles to mock the Bible. Isn't that interesting? The way Cornelius Van Til put it, he says, like a little girl sitting on her father's lap, slapping him, spitting in the face, insulting him. She can only do it because her father supports her. Unbelievers are like that. They're sitting in God's lap, spitting in his face, slapping him. They can only do it because God continues to support them. Isn't that interesting? It really gives you a window into the graciousness of our Lord. So how do we expose this foolishness, the fact that secularists rely on these things because they know in their heart of hearts that's true? In their heart of hearts, they really do. They just reject it. They don't want to know God. And they work very hard to convince themselves and others that they don't know God. How do we do it? You see, at first you might think, well, biblical worldview or secular worldview, it's just a question of preference. Do you like blue? Do you like flame color? Take your pick. But we're going to find the biblical worldview, when we open it up, it makes sense. It can lead to knowledge. It can go somewhere. The secular worldview, when we examine it carefully, can't go anywhere. It can't make knowledge possible. It can't justify laws of logic or uniformity in nature or morality. None of those things make sense in a secular universe. How do we expose that? With an internal critique. Let me show you how this works. Relativism, for example. Some people say all things are relative. There are no absolutes. Then the question you want to ask is, are you absolutely certain? Right? Because the statement, there are no absolutes, is an absolute statement. If it's true, it's false. Therefore, it's false. You see how that worldview blows itself up on its own terms? You just have to ask a question. That's all you have to do. Now, I mentioned that many evolutionists are strict empiricists. They believe that all truth claims are proved by empirical observation. You want to know something? Science. That's the way we answer all questions. Observation and experimentation. And by the way, I think that many truth claims are answered that way, but not all of them. Not all of them. But the person who believes this, that all truth claims are proved by empirical observation, I'm going to ask him one question. How do you know the statement itself is true? After all, was it proved by empirical observation? See, the statement, all truth claims are proved by empirical observation, is itself a truth claim that is not proved by empirical observation, right? Because you can't observe all truth claims. There's an infinite number of them. And you can't really observe a truth claim anyway. They're abstract. So you see, if it's true that you should reject things that are not proved empirically, then you should reject the sentence itself because it wasn't proved empirically. Isn't that fascinating? See, it's self-refuting. And what you'll find is that all non-biblical worldviews are self-refuting, all of them. They blow themselves up on their own terms. You just have to light the match. That's all you got to do. Push the unbeliever to be consistent with what he says he believes, and in all cases it'll come around and destroy itself. Why? Because it's God's word that makes knowledge possible. Anything else collapses into foolishness. That's what we read. Proverbs 1:7 makes that clear. So it may seem like there's this impassable gulf because I'm standing on my biblical presuppositions, my secular colleague is standing on some combination of those secular presuppositions. It may seem like we can't get anywhere because we can't just throw evidence back and forth. We'll just reinterpret it according to our worldview. But that secular worldview, we can't meet on neutral ground either because there isn't any, but we need to recognize that secular presuppositions are sinking sand. They will not support knowledge. You cannot make sense of universal invariant laws of logic in a secular universe. You can't make sense of it. Or for that matter, any religion other than the biblical one. You can't make sense of absolute objective morality on that system. It's not going to work. It's only on the biblical worldview that we can make sense of those things. So when that sand dissolves away, the unbeliever's left in a rather awkward position. What's he going to do? He's going to do that. Non-Christians will stand on Christian presuppositions like laws of logic because they have to. The unbeliever might deny being made in God's image, but he cannot escape being made in God's image. He's got to live in God's universe. And if he's going to survive, he's going to have to use the laws of logic that God has implanted to some extent in our nature. Babies are born knowing something about logic. It's amazing. But now, he's going to deny that. I'm going to point out, look, fellow, you're standing on God's ground. You either need to get saved or stop trespassing, right? Because you're stealing Christian presuppositions, and yet you're denying Christianity. You're a presuppositional kleptomaniac, compulsively stealing from the Christian worldview. You can't do that. He's going to deny that. He's going to say, no, laws of logic, that's not a Christian presupposition. I say, oh, yes, then how do you justify them? And your confidence that they will work 1 second from now? Or how do you know they'll work on the moon? How do you know they'll work on Mars? I can account for that. Can you? They can't. Not on their professed worldview. You can think of a debate on origins a lot like a debate on the existence of air. Can you imagine two people arguing whether or not air exists? Can you imagine the critic of air making all these elaborate arguments against air, using air, and breathing air to make the argument? See, the critic of air would have to use air in order to argue against air. Wouldn't that be peculiar? And yet that's exactly the case that we have with Scripture. The critic of the Bible has to use biblical presuppositions in order to argue against the Bible. See, the critic of air who uses air to argue against air, his argument would have to be wrong or he couldn't make it. Likewise, the person who uses laws of logic or whatever to try and disprove the Bible, his argument would have to be wrong. Otherwise, he couldn't make it. Because if the Bible's not true, he wouldn't have any basis for trusting in laws of logic or even their existence, let alone their properties. Isn't that interesting? And one of the reasons I like to emphasize those three things, there's more than that. There's a lot of things we take for granted that if we thought about it, realize that, you know what, that comes from God. And it makes no sense in any other worldview. Human dignity and freedom, that makes sense only if in the Christian worldview. But I like those three, laws of logic, orderliness in nature, and morality, because every argument against the Bible will assume one or more of those three things. Think about it. Any argument you've ever heard against the Bible, that people will say, well, the Bible's illogical because it contradicts itself. Oh, you're assuming the law of non-contradiction, that's a law of logic. That comes from God's nature. The reason we have a law of non-contradiction is because the Bible says God cannot deny himself. That's why there is that law. But you claim the Bible's not true, so how do you know contradictions are always false? He says, well, I've never seen a true contradiction. I'll say, okay, I've never seen Antarctica. Does that mean it doesn't exist? That's not a good argument, right? Or they'll say the Bible's unscientific. It's been disproved by science. Oh, science relies on orderliness in nature. How would you expect that in a chance universe? Science comes out of a Christian worldview. That's why it works. Secularists like to use science, but they forget that it makes no sense apart from the Christian worldview on which it's based. Or they'll say the Bible is morally disgusting because God did this or that or the other, and that's wrong. Oh, you want to talk about right and wrong. That makes no sense for chemicals. What one chemical does to another, there's no right or wrong about it. It just does it, right? If we're just fizzing chemicals, there is no right and wrong. See what I'm saying? Every argument against Christianity has to assume the truth of Christianity to get off the ground. Isn't that fascinating? So you'll find that secularists have to stand on Christian presuppositions like laws of logic or science, uniformity in nature, or morality, absolute objective morality, in order to stand at all, in order to make the argument. And then they argue against the Christian position that provides them the ground on which they must stand to make the argument. Isn't that a peculiar situation? It really is like that, though. As I thought through different ways to illustrate this, I kept thinking of those old Wile E. Coyote cartoons where he gets caught up in his own trap, because that's always the way it is. That's all the secularist has to stand on Christian ground to make the argument against Christianity. If hypothetically he were successful in refuting Christianity, then he would lose the ground on which he must stand to make the argument. He would lose any rational basis for having laws of logic or uniformity of nature or morality. And it's not just those three, but I like to drill home. If this is a new way of thinking to you and you're thinking, I don't know, that's awfully deep and it's kind of abstract, start with morality, because I think we do think about right and wrong, but how would that make sense in an atheistic universe? Sure, if God created us, then he's got the right to make the rules, and he will hold us accountable for actions. I have a very good reason to uphold God's standard, because that's the standard on which I'm going to be judged on Judgment Day, and we fall short, we need a Savior. But my point is, we have an absolute code because God's the creator and the judge. But if God did not create us, why would there be an absolute moral code? If we're just rearranged pond scum, why not make up our own rules? Now, some people might say that's right. There isn't an objective morality. We are just rearranged pond scum. You can make up your own moral code, so can I. I love it when they do that, because then I ask them, then why shouldn't I just shoot you? What if I pull out my Glock? Can you give me a reason I shouldn't pull the trigger? Go ahead, make my day. Now, what's he going to do? If he says, well, you can't do that because that would be objectively wrong, then I'm going to say, oh, okay, then you've made my day because you've demonstrated that morality is objective. If he says, no, I guess I can't think of a reason, then I pull the trigger and I win the debate that way, right? I wouldn't do that because I understand in my worldview that's not the way you win debates. I have things like laws of logic that stem from the nature of my God. But you see, my secular colleague, he can't, in his worldview, he can't give any logical, objective reason for why you can't win a debate by simply shooting your opponent. Because if we're just rearranged pawn scum, why not? How do you decide right from wrong? That's a question that you can ask unbelievers. You think this is right? You think that's wrong? You've got some opinions on issues. You've got opinions on abortion. You've got opinions on this, that, and the other. Are those just preferences? Like, I don't like it when people put pineapple on a pizza. I think that's pretty disgusting. Should that be outlawed? I think it should be, but maybe you don't. Maybe you like that. Is murder like that? Is that just my opinion? Or is it objective? Is it objective? Because you see, apart from the biblical God, morality can only be relative. It can only be my preferences versus your preferences. But that's not morality, folks. That's just preferences. That's just preferences. And people will not and cannot live that way. You pull a gun on somebody, and they'll say, oh, no, just kidding. Morality is objective. It applies to you and me, which is why you can't do that. They will very quickly convert, right? I'm not advocating you actually do that, but as a hypothetical, it's a great concept. What are some possible responses? And there aren't many. Some people will say, well, good is what brings the most happiness to the most people. Some evolutionists answer that way. You don't need God to know right and wrong. Good is simply that which brings about the most happiness to the most people. I say, okay, so if I could make a lot of people really happy by shooting you, would that be okay? Now, in the secular worldview, happiness, that's just a chemical reaction in your brain. Why am I under any obligation to try and achieve that particular chemical reaction in your brain, as opposed to, say, pain? Somebody else comes along and says, good is what brings the most pain to the most people. That's just another chemical reaction in the brain. Now, why is one definition any better than the other? So you can't answer that in a secular worldview, can you? Frankly, it makes no sense to be concerned about the happiness of chemical accidents. Do you go out to your garage, there's a can of motor oil, and are you happy? I want to make sure you're happy. It's a can of motor oil. It's chemicals, right? What one chemical does to another is irrelevant. And even this, they're subtly borrowing on the Christian worldview, because some of you think, well, we should be concerned about others. In the Christian worldview, yes. Right? You see, the person here who's saying, no, you don't need God to know right and wrong. Just, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I'm thinking, I've heard something like that somewhere before. Right? He's borrowing on Scripture. Yes, it makes sense to be concerned about others if they're made in God's image, and if God's commanded us to love your neighbor as yourself, which he has. The moral code is simply electrochemical impulses in the brain. I was debating with somebody who was a PhD neurologist. He was an expert on the brain. I said, how do you account for morality? There's probably a section of the brain. Then why should I obey it? Why should I follow it? In your view, it's just chemicals. Why should I obey what these chemicals do? I mean, I've got chemicals in my stomach. Should I use my indigestion to tell me right from wrong? Right? That doesn't make any sense. Might as well, roll a magic 8-ball and, yes, okay, that's what I'll do then. Some people say laws of morality are conventions adopted for the benefit of society. We need laws, Dr. Lisle, otherwise people might go around acting like animals. You'd say, well, in your worldview, isn't that what we are? Why would that be a problem? Works pretty well in the animal kingdom, right? And by the way, even this, benefit assumes a standard of goodness, doesn't it? Words like benefit assume that there's an objective standard of goodness. Who decides what benefits society? Hitler had some ideas about that I think I would disagree with, right? I hope you do too. So, if we're just chemical accidents, it makes no sense to have laws that enforce the way we fizz. We just fizz the way we fizz. That's what chemicals do. Just imagine, to drill this home, an evolutionist who is outraged at seeing a violent murder on television. Says, I can't believe that man killed that little girl. That's terrible. He should go to jail. Now, I would certainly be upset by that kind of action, but why would an evolutionist be upset at one chemical accident getting rid of another chemical accident? Why should he be angry? In his view, it's just one chemical doing chemistry to another chemical. Why would you be upset at that? Like if you mix vinegar and baking soda, it will fizz. Every time. You don't get mad at it and say, bad baking soda, you shouldn't have fizzed that way. Because that's just what chemicals do. It doesn't make sense to be angry at what one chemical accident does to another chemical accident. You know why he's angry? Because he knows in his heart of hearts that people are made in the image of God and that murder is objectively wrong. See, even the person who denies God He exhibits his knowledge of God in the way he behaves. Everybody does that. Because the moment they say something is right or wrong, they've assumed an objective standard of goodness that makes no sense in an atheistic universe. It only makes sense in a universe where God has revealed himself and his will to us, which he has. It's the Christian world. So it's a behavioral inconsistency. And the idea that we should punish criminals for their crimes, well, that's a Christian principle too. But if we're just animals, you don't punish animals, right? I mean, the lion goes out and kills another lion. You don't put it in jail and say, you better think about what you did. The animals just do what animals do. There's no morality there, not really. So this is the way that I think about whenever I see somebody trying to argue against the Christian worldview. They have to stand on the Christian worldview. They will try to use God's laws of logic to argue that the Bible's illogical. They'll try to use science, which is only possible because God upholds his universe in a consistent way and has promised us that he will continue to do so. They'll try to use science then to refute the Bible, the foundation for science, or they'll say the Bible is morally flawed because of whatever, because God allows slavery or what have you. But there could be no moral standard if the Bible's not true and if God's not the way the Bible says he is. So every argument against Christianity tacitly assumes the truth of Christianity. And this isn't just an argument for biblical creation. It's really an argument for the Christian worldview as a system of thought. And if you get this, it's powerful. It's powerful. Before I understood the things that I'm sharing with you today, I had difficulty with defending the faith because although I knew a lot of science, again, people know more, and there are some people that know more, and there's other people that no matter what science I present, they'll have a rescuing device to explain it away. So you have to go to the worldview. You have to say, no, wait a minute, your worldview doesn't even make sense of the possibility of having scientific evidence. That's powerful. And if you get that, you can agree with the Apostle Paul and say, where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? He certainly has. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. Sanctify Christ as Lord, recognizing that he is Yahweh, he is God over all creation. All truth is in him. Then you can be ready always to give a defense to anyone who asks you of the reason for the hope that's in you, and to do so with meekness and fear, with gentleness and respect. This is so powerful, and I hope that you will pursue this further. It's hard to get all this information in just one presentation because there's a lot to absorb here. But I've been able to teach this method to high school students within a week, and they've got it by the end of the week, and they can refute anybody that dares challenge what the Bible says. Because no matter what argument the secularist uses, he's going to have to use God's laws of logic or some kind of science that is made possible because God upholds his universe consistently, or he's going to make a moral argument which presupposes the truth of the Bible. Every argument against the Bible presupposes the truth of the Bible to get off the ground. And it shows that people really do know in their heart of hearts the biblical God. The problem is not lack of knowledge. The problem is they do not want to know that God because they hate him. They don't want to live according to his rule. And this is a powerful method to do it. Again, go back to what I said at the beginning. I'm not guaranteeing you that people will immediately convert and say, you're right. Not only is creation true, but the Bible, I can see that. The Bible is true. I have to repent and trust in Christ. I have had that happen. Some people do. But not everybody does, but that's okay. It's not our job to open people's hearts. That's up to the Holy Spirit. It's our job to close their mouths. That's what this method does. And then it's all the more important to remember the last part too, because as you get better at this, you can refute anybody that dares to challenge the Bible, anybody. And so it's all the more important to remember with gentleness and respect. I've been kind of blunt in the hypothetical answers I've given. Always be truthful with people, but be gracious as well, because remember, if God hadn't opened up our eyes, we'd be in exactly the same boat. We'd be in exactly the same situation. So there's no room for arrogance in apologetics, because we've all been the fool. And if God hadn't turned our hearts around and saved us, we'd still be the fool. So remember, gentleness and respect. That critic is also made in the image of God and deserves respect. And we've all been the critic at one point. So the key is to base our thinking on God's word in every area. Lots of resources on this. Again, the website, biblicalscienceinstitute.com. The book that I've written on this topic, The Ultimate Proof of Creation, which you can get in the back there. And I've been told that I talk too fast, so I wrote the book really slowly, so you can take your time with it. Yeah. And we do have this on DVD as well, and so you can check that out. Tomorrow I'll be talking about understanding Genesis and the importance of that. and how to use Genesis to more effectively communicate the gospel. So again, check out these resources. Lots of great stuff back there. I'm not going to go through all these, but I will mention, because I'm not doing a talk on it this time, I don't think, but Introduction to Logic is one of my latest books, and boy, this is powerful stuff, because most people have never had a class in logic. And it's certainly not taught in public schools. I think there's a reason for that. Logic is about correct thinking, learning to think, learning to be discerning, thinking in a way that's consistent with God's character. And of course, we don't want that in schools, right? Not public schools anyway, because then it's harder to get the evolutionary stuff shoved down their throat. But it's so helpful to learn to think properly. And this is written really at a junior high to high school level. But a lot of adults have never had logic, so feel free to pick this up. Maybe use it with your students. I kind of had homeschoolers in mind when I wrote it. There's a teacher's guide if you want to use this as a sort of a homeschool curriculum. Get them thinking right when they're young, and boy, that'll go a long way when they get older. They can see that their professor commits a logical fallacy. They say, I'm not fooled by that one. And it also shows how logic originates in the mind of God and would be meaningless. Laws of logic would be meaningless if it weren't for the biblical God as revealed in Scripture. So some other fun resources, the physics of Einstein. I'm going to touch on that a little bit tomorrow evening, actually, if you're able to come to the astronomy one. Creation evangelism, how to use creation to better share the gospel. Secret code of creation, I'll be doing this one tomorrow night. And this one was mind-blowing. This will really, it's unique. I don't even want to give too much away, but if you can't make it, we do have it on DVD or Blu-ray. And we got a book that goes along with that, The Secret Code of Creation. So don't forget about the packs, the book pack, the video pack, or the library pack, which kind of are best of everything. And do sign up for that newsletter. So, and don't forget to like us on Facebook, too, if you would. And check us out on the web at Biblical Science Institute. So thank you very much. God bless.